Let's go. We are on Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. We had a debate between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish about whether or not something that is fried in a frying pan is going to be considered bread or not. Okay? So Meisvei, the Gemara challenges Rav Yochanan's view. We're 37b1, Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, second paragraph. We challenge Rav Yochanan's view from the following brisa. Ha'me'isa. Me'isa is, as we'll see, a type of flour that comes into contact with boiling water. Beis Shammai Prochin. Beis Shammai says that such a bread made from such flour is going to be exempt from challah. Ubeisel mechayven, Beisil says it is obligated in challah. Chalita, which is also a different type of, we'll see what the difference is in a moment, but flour that comes into contact with boiling water. Beis Shammai mechayven, Ubeisel pochrin. Beis Shammai says you are obligated. Beisil says you are exempt. Okay, so it flips, right? The first one, the flour and boiling water, Beis Shammai says you're pater, Beisil says you're chayav. The next one, which is also a form of flour and boiling water, there Beis Shammai says you're chayav, and Beisil says you're exempt, right? So it gets flipped, okay? Ezer me'isa ve'ezer chalita. What is the difference between those two? Ha-me'isa kemach shel gabe muglashin. Me'isa is flour poured over boiling water. So you have boiling water over here, and you pour the flour into it, okay? So you have a little pot of boiling water, and then you pour flour into it, okay? Ha-chalitza muglashin shel gabe kemach. Whereas chalitza is you have flour and you pour the boiling water into it, right? So one is the flour goes into the water, one is the water goes into the flour, okay? We'll come back to why Beis Shammai and Beisil would distinguish between them, right? Because in one case, Beis Shammai says it's going to be bread. In another case, he says it's not going to be bread. And Beisil says the opposite. We'll come back to that in a moment. But let's first finish the brisa. Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Yossi, Omer Mishum Aviv, Zev Zev Liftur. Rabbi Shmuel says in the name of his father, Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rabbi Yossi, says in the name of Rabbi Yossi that in both cases, the flour, water, and boiling water cases, you are going to be pater from challah. V'amri lei Zev Zev Lechiyov. And there's another version that has him quoting his father saying that in both cases you are obligated in challah. Each one, asan be'ilpis pater. Okay, if you fried it in a frying pan, then you're exempt from challah. B'taner chayav. But if you're going to bake them in an oven, then you're going to be chayav in challah. Okay, it's the last line that's going to be the most important to our discussion, right? Because you have the chachamim saying that if you fried in a frying pan, you are going to be exempt from challah. Okay, which is part of our debate between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish. We'll come back to that in a moment. First, we're going to analyze the brisa. So, the Tanakama, Ma'ishna Ha'me'isa u'Ma'ishna Chalita. What's the difference? Within the Tanakama, you have Beis Hill saying in one case, if you pour the hot water in, it distinguishes between pouring the hot water over the flour or the flour over the hot water. In one case, Beis Hillel says you're chayav, and Beis Shammai says you're pater. In the other case, Beis Shammai says you're chayav, Beis Hillel says you're pater. Like they seem like the same case. What's the difference? Am Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, v'chein Amar Rabbi Yochanan, v'yitem Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Okay, one of these people said, "Kemachlokas bezu, kach machlokas bezu v'tavra." Okay, basically saying that you're right. It's actually the same argument in each one. And the brisa is actually contradictory. Mishashana zo, lo shana zo. Whoever taught this part of the brisa did not teach this part of the brisa. So we haven't seen too many of these, but Rabbi Yehuda actually says this quite a lot throughout Shas. And he says that sometimes you'll have a brisa where it's internally contradictory. It's internally contradictory. And the assumption is that whoever put this brisa together actually kind of, I don't know, we'll call it like not the best editing job, basically put two contradictory statements side by side, and they're really coming from different sources. Right? Normally, the brisa is supposed to flow. But Rabbi Yehuda basically saying that no, whoever taught this part of the brisa did not teach this part of the brisa, whoever taught this part of the brisa did not teach this part of the brisa. In other words, he's saying, you're right, really, there's no difference between pouring hot water over flour or flour over hot water. In both cases, that's not your classic bread type of, bread, you don't normally, when you make bread, you don't put boiling water into the bread. You put normal, warm water. This whole boiling water, really it's the same. According to one opinion, Beis Hillel says that in those cases you're going to be exempt. In another case, Beis Hillel says you're going to be chayav. And the fact that these two lines end up side by side, it's actually, we'll call it not a mistake, but basically two different opinions placed side by side in the same brisa. Right? You know what I mean? In other words, really, you don't read the brisa as one flow. Rather, there's two opinions in the brisa. Okay, says the Gemara further. Tani miyas. Here's the key line. One way or another, the brisa taught, the last line of the brisa, the chacham say, echad zeh ve'echad zeh, whether it's me'isa or chalita, shasan be'ilpis pater. If it was made in a frying pan, you are going to be exempt from challah, betan or chayiv, make it in an oven, then you are going to be chayav. To Rav Yochanan, this would seem to be a refutation of Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said that frying is the same as baking. If you recall, Rabbi Yochanan was the one who said frying is regular, full-fledged bread. It's only when it's baked by the sun, that's when you're going to be exempt. But Rabbi Yochanan, Reish Lakish said frying is not bread, right? But Rabbi Yochanan said frying is bread, okay, and therefore you're going to be chayiv in challah. It's only when you bake something under the sun, that's when Rabbi Yochanan said you're going to be exempt from challah. So the bottom line is that The bottom line is this brisa is a contradiction to Rav Yochanan's view, who said that frying is the same as baking, because here you have the Chacham saying that once it's fried, it is exempt from challah. So Rav Yochanan concedes, and he says, you're right, this brisa clearly does not go like me, and rather Tanaihi, it's actually machlokes Tanaim, right? In other words, Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish are Amoraim, right? They, in an ideal world, want to say that their view is agreed to by all those of the earlier generation. But here Rav Yochanan is forced to say, this brisa clearly does not go like me, and therefore what he's going to show us is that while this brisa that we just quoted does not go like him, because it clearly says frying is not a form of baking, is not bread, but there's another brisa Rabbi Yochanan is going to say which does support him. So let's see that brisa. The Tanya was taught in another brisa, Yachal yeh me'isa v'chalutza chayav v'mechala. You may have thought that me'isa and chalita, again, those are the flour that's mixed with boiling water. You may have thought that they're obligated in challah. Tamalomar lechem. The Torah says bread, okay, which teaches me that they are not going to be obligated. Okay, fine. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, ein lechem ela afay betaner. And then Rabbi Yehuda comes along, okay, and that was the end of the brisa, and it says that bread, that the term bread only means something which is baked. Okay, so now the Gemara asks, and that's the end of the brisa. So again, Tanakama said, you may have thought Me'isa and Chalita are obligated in Chala, and the Gemara and the Torah says lechem, saying no, since they are they're fried to some extent, they have boiling water mixed with the flour, therefore they're not considered bread. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, bread is only something you bake. So Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama are seemingly saying the same thing. Tanakama is saying that it has to be baked, and Rabbi Yehuda says it has to be baked. That's what's difference. So Ella lav ma'ase ilpa sikimanayo. It must be that what they're arguing about is products that are made in a frying pan. Tanakama savar ma'ase ilpas chayavin. The Tanakama holds that products of a frying pan are obligated in challah. In other words, all the Tanakama said is if it's me'isa and chalita, they are exempt. Okay, but let's say it's not hot water poured over flour, or flour poured over hot water, but rather you make bread, you take warm water like you normally do, and flour, and you fry it. The Tanakam would say, oh, you're going to be chayav. Rabbi Yehuda Savar, no, Maise Ilpis Patron. Rabbi Yehuda comes along and says, no, only baked in an oven is coming to tell me that anything less than an oven is not considered bread. Okay, so you see the Tanakama supports Rabbi Yochanan's view because he holds that fried products, right? Because again, if what we're saying now is that the difference between Tanakama and Rabbi Yehuda is that Rabbi Yehuda is saying that only things baked in an oven are going to be chayav for challah, which means the Tanakama is saying that if it's not baked in an oven, if it's fried in a frying pan, then you are going to be, then you're still going to be chayav. That is the view of Rav Yochanan. So Rav Yochanan has shown us that there is a Tana who supports his view, who holds that things which are fried are indeed considered like bread. Okay, the Gemara points out there is another way to read this brisa which does not support Rav Yochanan. And how do you do that? Lo, alternatively, no. Dekuli alma maisilpas peturin. Really, you can read the brisa to not be like Rav Yochanan and to say that everyone would agree that frying pans, that like Rish Lakish, and would say that if you fry bread, then you are exempt. Everyone would agree if it's just fried, then it's not considered bread. Then it's, we'll call it a donut, right? If it's just fried. But if it's fried, well, no, actually, take that back. Whatever. It's just fried, it's not going to be chayv. But if you go ahead and you bake it after you fry it, the Tanakama savar, kevan shechazar vafo betaner lechem karina be. The Tanakama would hold that as long as you bake it after you fry it, it's considered bread. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda savar, ein lechem ela afo betaner me'ikara. And what Rabbi Yehuda is coming along to tell us is that no, bread is only when it's fully baked in the oven and not baked at all, not fried at all. The kevan me'ikara lab betaner afye. And since it was not baked initially, meaning it was fried initially, lav lechemhu, it's not considered bread. Okay, and that's the other way to read this machlokes. The machlokes would really be about bagels, essentially, right? In other words, the way to read this machlokes is if it's fried. If it's fried and then baked, right, which is, right, you boil and then bake, right, that would be, the Tanakam would say, since at some point it was baked in the oven, it's considered bread, right, and Rabbi Yehuda would come along and say, no, only when things are fully baked in the oven. If it went through a different heating process at some point, it's not considered bread, and therefore Yehuda would hold that bagels, let's say, are not considered bread. We don't pass like Rabbi Yehuda, we pass like bagels are full-fledged bread, even though it was fried. Bottom line is we treat it like full-fledged bread, even though it's fried or boiled rather, and then eventually baked. Okay, Amar Rava, says Rava, my time at Rabbi Yehuda. What is the source for Rabbi Yehuda's reasoning? Tichsiv, Pasuk says in the context of the Tochacha, in Vayikra, in Sefer Vayikra, Va'afu Esther Nashim Lachmechem B'Tanur Echad. It says 10 women will bake your bread in one oven. Okay, the simple understanding is that they have so little flour and water that you can imagine 10 people making all their food in one oven. imagine like 10 people making like food for the whole family in one oven. Obviously, we're speaking about a very, very small, minute amount of food. That's the simple read. But Rabbi Yehuda has a drasha here. What does it mean in one oven? So lechem ha'afoy b'tanur echad kar lechem. If the bread is baked in only one place, i.e., if it's baked in an oven and not baked anywhere else, if it's not just baked in a single oven, meaning it's baked elsewhere as well, it's baked also, it's warmed up, it's processed also by frying it, then it's no longer considered bread. Okay, it's a bit of a drasha, but the bottom line is, again, Rabbi Yehuda would hold bagels would not be bread. We do not possibly like that. Bagels are full-fledged bread. It's bread for challah, which is our topic, but it's also going to be bread for lechem mishnah and hamotzi and all those things. Okay, let's go further. Yosef, Rabba, Rav Yosef, Achored, Rav Zeri. We have a funny, interesting dialogue over here. Keep in mind, back in the day, the way things would work in the yeshiva is that you had the teacher in the front, and then you had the most prestigious students in the front row, and then the next level, and then the next level. Okay, so Tzvi, Jesse, you guys would be considered the chashuvim, still like that. Tzvi says yes. Okay, so yeah, basically, and then all the way to Dov, who just because starts going, but the bottom line is right. It would go in order of you'd have to it would be in order of chashivas. Nowadays people would all the mommies would complain that their kids back in the not that long ago my Rebbe told me Rabbi Eliezer Brodowitz who was Masbach of Israel told me that when he was in yeshiva, Ruderman was the first Rosh Yeshiva. When he would come to the dining room, the Rosh Yeshiva would come to the dining room, be there for the Shabbos meal every few weeks, whatever it was. He would basically pick, these are the top bachrim. They sit at my table. And basically nowadays parents would lose their mind because it would be hard for the kids. But whatever they didn't, it wasn't like the medal for everyone type of generation, a trophy for everyone. And basically, these are the top people. Anyway, that's the way it worked. So you had the first row, and then you had the next row, and it would be only the people in the first row are really the ones supposed to be asking questions. You're in the back row, who are you? Right? You haven't really established yourself. You're not supposed to be asking any questions. So with that in mind, let's read the next Gemara. Yosef, Rabba, Rav Yosef, Achor, Rav Zera. Rabba and Rav Yosef were seated behind Rav Zera. Yosef, Rav Zera, Kamei to Ula. And Rav Zera was sitting in front of Ula. Ula was the teacher. Rav Zera was in row number 1. And Rav Yosef and Rabba were in row number 2. Okay, so they can't really ask. It's inappropriate for Rabba and Rav Yosef to ask the questions directly. So what they're going to do is the following: Amalei Rabba Rav Zera. Rabba taps Rav Zera in middle of shir. Okay, and they're sitting there together. And he doesn't, and he says it. It says, "By my name Ula." Ask the following question of Ula. Do me a favor. Ask the following question of our teacher. What if a person attached dough to the inside of a frying pan and heated it up from the outside? In other words, what we call frying. Basically, he put the dough in the frying pan and then he held it over the fire. What's the halacha? Ask that to the Rebbe. So Amalei Rav Zera turns back to Rabba and says, "My Amalei. What's the question to ask him?" And he's like, this is a silly question. If I ask him that question, Amrli, he's obviously going to answer me, this is a simple case of a frying pan. And Rish Lakish and Yochanan already discussed it and have their opinions. In other words, there's a reason he's in the row in front of them. He's like, guys, it's not a good question. We all know the answer. Don't bother. Amr Rav Yosef Zera. Rav Yosef, the one sitting next to Rabbah, then turns to Rav Zera and says, ask the following question. What if the person attached the dough to the inside of the frying pan, okay, and then placed the frying pan so the flame was opposite the top of the pan? In other words, you have a fire, and then basically the point is that you have the fire and you have the bread reaching the fire more directly. So however you construct it, but basically as opposed to your classic case of a fire, and then you have the pan and you have the thing over here, but instead you have the fire being able to reach the food directly without the pan in the middle, which is which as we're about to see was it helps bake things faster. Would some have like a broiler, right? You have the fire on top, and then you have the thing under it. So basically, construct some elevated thing. Nowadays our ovens make it easier for us. But basically, back in the day for broiling, they would probably put some sticks where the fire was able to be held up by something, and then you stick something under it to broil it. Okay. So the question is, what's the halacha? Broiling goes faster, and because it's faster, it's actually cheaper, right? So if you didn't have a lot of you didn't have a lot of wood, this was actually a very wise way to bake things because it would go a lot faster. Okay, so he says, my Amalei. So Amalei, Rav Zera says back to Rav Yosef, my Amalei. What's there for me to ask him? Diaminale, if I ask him that question, Amalei, Rovani Mosim came. He says this is the normal way for poor people to use a frying pan. In other words, back in, again, people had very, very minimal funds, and they didn't have, and so, yes, if you had a lot, then you would go ahead and use the frying pan on top of the fire. But people who were afraid they didn't have so much firewood, what they would do is they would find a way to slip their pan under the fire, because then it's hotter, and therefore you don't need as much wood. So he says that's frying. For when Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish argued about frying, they had this in mind. This is part of their discussion because that is the normal way. Since so many people were poor, this was the normal way for people to be frying, and therefore this is clearly part of their discussion already. And basically said, guys, go back to your second row. Your questions are not very good questions, and keep on learning. Bottom line is okay. Bottom line is Rebbe and Rav Yosef did just fine in life. They became the leaders ultimately. But okay, at this.
The guy, is he mentioned anywhere else?
Yeah, all throughout. Yeah.
He stays ahead.
Exactly. Okay. All right. We are gonna stop over here. Have a great day.